Okay guys, by special request, the Rumours Riddim. Okay, this one is going to be a bit longer than usual because there's quite a lot to explain and talk about here. Okay, sure, let's do it. Right, now, this is actually a very simple beat and bass line, but what makes it difficult to achieve is the unique sounds. And we'll talk about that more towards the end. Well, with the side stick snare, that's what really is the unique thing. The other thing about this is it is using massive amounts of swing. Right, now let's get into it. First thing to note, look at the tempo. 167.9520, nearest damn it 168 beats per minute. It's this odd tempo because I extracted the tempo from a loop of a piece of the audio. So it's nearest damn it 168 beats per minute. That is jungle tempo, right? And then drum and bass. Jungle originates from, if you watch my tutorials, jungle originates from reggae music played at double tempo with a break beat being triggered on the 3-time break rhythm, which is ba 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 ba, 1 2 3 1 2 3 1 2 1 2 3 1 2 3 1 2, like that, right? So this rhythm is running at double tempo. Now, without getting into the whole argument, and you know what, I'm going to actually do a whole video on this to put this to bed once and for all, right? But without getting into that whole argument, over the couple of years I've been doing these tutorials, every so often, usually a rock drummer or a rock musician will pop up and say, "Look mate, you don't know what you're talking about. Reggae music, the snare drum always drops on the 3, the third beat of the bar. That's what makes reggae reggae. You don't know what you're talking about." Because in a lot of the rhythms, nearly all the rhythms that I've shown you, I'm dropping the snare on the 2 and the 4 inside one bar, right? Well, look, here's the thing. If you really, really, really understand reggae, you really have played it a lot, then when you play reggae music, or even when you listen to it, you know that the secret of reggae is that you are always counting at 2 tempos at the same time. Bass tempo and double tempo. That's how I'd call it, right? So this rhythm is running at double tempo, therefore it takes 2 bars to complete 1 cycle of the drum beat and 1 cycle of the bass line. And at double tempo, the snare does drop on the 3, right? So let's start by looking at the beat. Now, the beat is made up of some drum machine sounds and that very, very special, deeply detuned side stick snare sound, right? And here they are. Here's the basic beat. There it is, right? And because we're running at double tempo, 2 bars to complete 1 cycle of the drums and the bass line, and the snare is dropping on the 3 because we're running at double speed. But because we're running at double speed, the hats are playing 8ths rather than 16ths. Here's the pattern. Okay, it's all about that swing, baby. It's all about that massive 8th swing. Let's look at that 8th swing. Let's mute all this. There's your hi-hats. Right, playing 8. So there's 1 cycle of the drums over 2 bars because it's a double tempo, and the main hats are dropping on the quarter beats. There, 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 there in the first bar, and then there, 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 and there in the second bar on the quarter beat. All the other hats are on the 8ths in between, but swung back a massive amount. So that, it's missing in this beat. That's important, and that. Those are actually all the 8th hats in the middle of each quarter beat. In the middle of that quarter beat, in the middle of that chord to beat, that one, that one, that one, that one, missing from that one and that one. But then they're swung back, boom, like that, with a massive amount of swing. And because we're at double tempo, running hats at 8s, the swing is 8th swing E. Now, I have slightly tweaked some of the hats. So that one, for example, there is slightly forward. The others are further back on the 8th E. But this one's been brought forward a smidge, right? Etc. You know, I've done a little bit of manual tweaking. But that's what gives the swing, right? But it's very important that that swing hat is missing in this third beat in the second half of the pattern, in the second bar. Okay, then the kick, and for this I'm using an 80s sounding kick from an 80s kit, but I've given it a fair bit of bottom end body. It's just on the 1 and on the 4, first beat, fourth beat, but then it cycles round again, so you get a double kick there. Bop, 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 bop. Okay, and the hats want to be not too clicky, they want to be a little bit fizzy, and the decay doesn't want to be too long. Okay, now there is, then you've got the main deeply detuned side stick snare, which is the massive feature of this Riddim, which is dropping, it's being triggered from the EXS sampler on a different track here. That's dropping on the 3 because we're running at double tempo. So it's on the third beat in this and this bar. Right, but there is another snare in there. Okay, this one here. Now this is an 80s sounding snare, but you want to tune out the bottom end of it. It doesn't want to be too beefy in the bottom end. It wants to be a little bit thin and fizzy. And there's this secondary snare running through all the time. And basically somebody just got on the drum machine and over the main beat layered the snare, doing that classic 3-time reggae thing from right like that. Take the kick out, you can hear it a lot more clearly. Okay, that's that. It's in there. And what it is that thin, quite artificial sounding snare. You don't want it too beefy, you don't want too much bottom, low, mid energy in it. It wants to be quite thin and fizzy. On the first beat and the fourth beat. First beat and the fourth beat. And then that one is the 8th in the middle of the second beat, swung back with the same 8th E swing. And this is the 8th in the middle of the second beat in the second bar, swung back with the 8th E swing, the same as the hi-hat above. Alright, and then that's your whole, that's the whole thing. Okay, right. Okay, that's the drop. It's really simple, but it's all about that swing and that detuned side stick snare type sound, which we'll talk about in detail at the end. As I said, just to, I'm using the Drum Machine Designer. For the kick, I'm using the Video Star kick, which is an 80s kick, sounding kick, quite clicky, but look how I've got the body turned up. It's got a lot of bottom end added to it, and the envelope's turned down a bit, so it's a little bit shorter. That's my kick. My hi-hat is the Deep Tech hat. It's fizzy, doesn't want to be clicky, but not too long a decay. The decay doesn't want to be long, right? And that's that. And the snare, that secondary snare going dup, 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 is this snare here. The Futura snare. Alright? Which is quite thin, right? Quite thin and fizzy. And I've taken bottom end out of it. Alright? That's what I'm using. Okay. As I said, that detuned side stick snare is coming from the EXS. We'll look at that at the end. Right, that's the beat. Easy peasy. 8th swing. Double tempo, so the snare drops on the 3. Right, let's look at bass line next. Now I'm actually using two basses for this, layered, two bass synths layered, right? Now when I knew I was going to have to do this tutorial, I thought somebody requested it and I was like, yeah, that would be a good one to do. Straight away I thought, well, you know what, I'm going to probably end up using the ESM for the bass, because it's that square wave bass. And the ESM in Logic is a square and sawtooth, very simple mono synth. So I've got it all the way to square wave, but the filter's turned right down. It doesn't want to be, look. Yeah, you don't want it to be too edgy. And with this particular synth, if you're not, you want to emulate this rhythm, but you're not using Logic. With this particular synth, because it also imitates 303s, it's got this envelope filter decay here, which is turned all the way up. Right? That's it. Right? And I'm layering that with a second square wave bass, which we'll look at in a minute. Right, so, and there's some compression on it. And EQ wise, I'm shelving up the bottom end and doing a scoop out there at about 1200 hertz. Right? Okay. Let's look at the pattern. There's the pattern. Because we're running at double tempo, it takes 2 bars to complete the cycle of the bass. Okay, so in essence the way the bass is composed is it's in G. The main notes are G, A sharp, back to G, back to G, G, A sharp, back to G, and the final note, different, C. Right? And all the main notes are on the quarter beat. There, 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 and there, 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 and there. Right? But you'll note that in each bar the third quarter note is pushed forwards, so it's being snatched. So the main notes are on the quarter beats, beat 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4. Then these little swing notes, right, they're actually the 8th notes in the middle of that quarter beat, in the middle of that quarter beat, in the middle of that and that quarter beat, but then they're swung back with that 8th E swing, pushing them right back. Now note, the notes do not want to overlap. You want a gap, not much, but you want a gap where one note ends and the next begins. This synth has got compression on, not too heavy, but enough to give some decent amount of definition to the attack of each note. Not massive amounts, but not, you don't want the attack to be soft. You've got to hear the attack of each note. And this particular synth, one of its characteristics is that when the note ends, there is no release. There's no amp envelope for this synth. So when the MIDI note ends, the sound just cuts out, stops. There is no even subtle amount of release. So that little gap is a gap. Yeah, you want a little gap between the notes. They do not want to smear into each other. You don't want the bass line going woo 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 woo. You want dub dub dub. You want an actual little gap, but not much, just a little, right? And then the length of the longer notes is important. Each of them is just over 2/16 in length, or just over an 1/8 in length, at this double tempo, right? And remember, the third note in each bar is forward of the beat, so it's being snatched like that, right? Okay, that's it. Now I copied that pattern over to the second synth. I wanted to get a little bit more character of, look, considering when this track was released, I'm thinking, okay, what were your options back then for a square wave bass with a very, very almost instant release? You know, to get a square wave sound back then, you're looking at what, like an old analog synth that could do it. But in terms of MIDI, Yamaha FM synths would do a square wave sound. Oh, I'll just have some coffee there. Or something like a Roland MKS gives you a really beautiful, hollow, honking square wave, a DCO synth. So I copied the pattern over to this other synth here, which is the retro synth, doing a deep square bass. And I brought the release right into 53 milliseconds, so it dies away almost instant when the notes end. But I copied the pattern over from the first synth, and you can see I've shortened the notes a bit, so there's even more of a gap between them to make it even more staccato. Right? It's a little bit more staccato. Without the compression on, it sounds like this. Yeah, it's got more staccato to it. And you can hear there's a little bit more fluty, square, odd harmonic in this one. And then I'm compressing it a lot. But I'm using this LA2A. Well, I'm not compressing it a huge amount, but it is making it drive a bit like this. So a little bit more staccato this one, because the notes are slightly shortened. Right? And then layered, they sound like this. And that's the main bass line, 2 bars long at double tempo, right? Now there is a secondary bass line. Let's look at that. That's over here. Here, and here. And you hear this on different parts of the song. Now this takes 4 bars to complete a cycle, right? Let's just hear it with one of the synths. There's the pattern. It's the same in bar 1, 2, 3, and bar 4 is a variation. Now what's interesting about this rhythm, again thinking about the time it was done, only basic sequencers were available. When you actually listen to different versions of this and you get into instrumental parts of the track, you can actually hear mistakes in the timing of the bass. You listen to it and you go, "Oh, that's out." All right, it's a little. He's hitting that note. Someone's gone in and and you can hear mistakes in the timing, and you sort of go, "Ooh, that's actually out." You know, if I was on that session, I'd have corrected that. But given the sequencers around at the time, that may not have been a possibility. Okay, there's the pattern, the variation pattern. It's the same in the first 3 bars with a variation at the end. So let's look at just one of those bars. There it is, and it's G, G, F, D, D, F. That's on the first beat of the bar. That's in beat 1. That's in beat 3. That's on beat 3. And that's on beat 4. This second log note is the 8th in the middle of that first beat, swung back with 8th E swing. But I've actually pushed it back. That's about 8th swing E. I've actually pushed it back a smidge more. That is the 8th in the middle of that quarter beat, swung back with 8th E swing, but it's been brought forward a smidge. 8th E swing would be about there. Now about there. It's been brought forward a bit, right? To there. That's on the money on the 3rd beat. That's on the 4th beat, and that is the 8th in the middle of the final beat, beat 4, swung back. But look, it's not even swung back half the length of that 16th. Okay, so it hasn't got the E swing, which will put it about there. It's swung back more like somewhere between B and C amount of 8th swing. So what I did was I probably swung it back there and then manually dragged it forward. But it's actually there, slightly forward of the middle of that 16th. And the length of these notes is important as well. Right? These two are pretty much, that's 2/16 in length. That one is just over 2/16 in length. That's about a 16th in length. That one is 1, 2, 3 and a tiny smidge more than 3/16 in length. That's the length it is, just under 2 16ths, and that's under the same, on slightly shorter, right? So there's 3 of those, bar 1, bar 2, bar 3, all the same, right? Well, actually they're not the same. If you look, that note is right on the money on the 3rd beat, but here it's snatched forwards. Look. And then that one is back on the money on the 3rd beat again, but the second one, it's slightly forward of that 3rd beat. Slightly forward, right? Snatched. And then the final pattern, the 4th bar, is a copy of this one with that note on the 3rd beat snatched forward, but instead of having that ending in the final quarter beat, it's just that back to G on the 4th beat, and it's 2/16 in length. Okay, and that's the second bass line, and I've just doubled it up with the other synth. See, bringing in this other synth just gives it a little bit more flutiness, just a little. It's subtle. Yeah, this is just introducing a little bit more additional odd harmonic tone, right? Okay, that's your 2 bass lines. Next, let's have a bit more coffee. Hang on. Ooh, lovely jubbly. Right, the chaps. The chaps take 4 bars to cycle round. That's the chords. Chank, 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 like that. Okay, I'm layering 3 things, but the 3rd one is very low. I'm layering an Afro, Cuban upright piano, any upright piano. It sounds to me like the chaps are a blend of an upright piano and a guitar, right? So I'm using, you can use any upright piano, but I'm actually using, in Logic, Legacy Jam Pack World Music, Pianos and Keyboards, Afro, Cuban upright piano. Right, there it is. And it takes 4 bars to complete a cycle of the chord sequence. There it is. Right, I don't hear that bass at all. Go away. Now, let me take the echo off, because I will talk about the echo at the end. Let's take the echo off. Okay, I've left the reverb on. It's got a hall reverb about 3.9 seconds. Not too much, but it's got hall reverb. There's the chords. Okay, and the chords are this. In the first bar, which is a G, same as the opening note to the bass. Bass line is in G. G and an octave G at the top, and the 2 middle notes, A sharp, D3. So A sharp 2, D3. Then copy that over to the next bar, and the bottom and top notes stay the same. G, G. The 2 middle notes, they move up to C3 and D sharp 3, giving us this chord. Then for the 3rd bar, back to the first chord. And the final bar, it resolves to a major chord. Right, which is A, an octave A, and the 2 notes in between, well, it's A2 and A3, and the 2 notes in between, C3, F3. Like that, and there's your complete pattern. Right, what I did then is I copied those chords over to the guitar track. It's a sampled, clean electric guitar. Copied the notes over and shorted them to make them more staccato. Let's take the echo off that as well. Right, this guitar track is sending out to the same 3.9 second hall reverb. Not too much of it, but a fair bit, you know, not swamped, right? It's the same chords copied over from the piano, right? But I've added an extra note into each chord. So this is the chord from the piano, but I've added a bottom octave note of D, which is an octave of that D there, just to give that chord more bottom end frequency, so it wasn't too high pitched, right? So it's the same chord as the piano with an octave D down there. Then it's moved across here, same chord as the piano, but I've added an upper octave note of C4, an octave above that, to make it a richer, fuller chord. Then back to the first chord, that one from the keyboard, with the octave note at the bottom. Yeah. Then the final major chord is, this is the one from the keyboard, with an octave at the bottom, an octave of the F there. Yeah. And they're all, the notes are all shortened to make it more staccato and chappier, right? And the two layered together sound like this without the echo. Okay, now I'm layering in a third keyboard as well, right? This one. I thought to myself, like back in that time, again, because reggae studios, generally speaking, didn't have a lot of money. And anyway, given the technology of the time, a lot of people would have been working with emulations of real pianos. So I wanted to add a little blend of fake 80s piano in there, like you get from a Yamaha DX, right? So I've used this, the retro synth, doing an FM quantum piano, and I've reduced the release right down to 200 milliseconds, so it releases pretty quick, fast. The note dies off, the sound dies away fast at the end of the notes. Not ultra fast, but not. It's about 200 milliseconds, right? Now this has got no reverb or echo on it at all. We'll look at the echo on the piano and the guitar in a minute. It's dry. And this is the sound. It's an artificial 80s piano type sound. This. Exactly the same chords as the real upright piano. It just gives you that tine-like FM edge. And the more of this you bring in, the more mid-range body you get. Right? So all of them together like this. And if I bring up that quantum piano, as I bring it up, you'll hear more and more lowerish mid-range coming in. Yeah, so you can add. I'm adding a bit of that into taste, but it's dry as a bone. No reverb, no echo. Let's go back to the piano. The piano and the guitar both are sending out. They're both sending out to that same 3.9 second hall, right? But they're both also sending out to an echo on the same send. Not too much, right? They're both sending out to a tape delay. On the auxiliary return, I've EQ'd the bottom end out with a low shelf. And they're going to this tape delay, which is set to 8th dotted, but I've used the deviation to give it a few extra milliseconds. Just push the deviation up a bit, right? Because you're getting an 8th dotted bounce back. Junk, 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 like that. Very little feedback, so you just hear really one repeat, and the next repeat is almost buried, right? But adding that little bit of deviation just gets it to swing a little bit better with the E swing, because it has, it's dotted, and if it's too straight on the money, it will clash with the swing, that 8th E swing, right? So a little bit of that echo like this. And that's your keyboards, the same all the way, right? That's all the chaps, keyboard and guitar. Okay, we're nearly there. Let's look now at that. There's two things more to look at really. The orchestral stab sample and that snare. Let's go with this. We'll save the snare to the end because it's fairly detailed to talk about. Right, the stab, the orchestral stab is a Fairlight sample Orc 5. Okay, a famous orchestral stab from back in the day, which found its way into lots of sample libraries. I'm pretty sure I've got it in my my EMU disc library. Thing about orchestral stabs was it was a sound no one had ever heard before, which sounded incredible when it came out. But also, you didn't have to pay any copyright as the sample manufacturer because it was taken from an old bit of classical music out of copyright. Right? So, although you might have had to pay some mechanical on it to whoever the recording was taken from, but probably by the time you mangled it a bit and it was put in an 8 or 12-bit sampler, it would be hard for the company to prove it was actually from their particular recording. Anyway, I've got it a lot brighter and crisper than in the versions of this where it's duller and more rounded, which is probably a consequence not only of the way it was chosen to be mixed with less top end on it, but that it was loaded into the slot of an early drum machine where you could blow the chip, or into an early 8-bit sampler. Alright. Anyway, I've got it a bit brighter. There's my EQ. I'll give you a bit of bottom end body and some shelf up the top to crisp it up. So it's brighter than it is in the original versions of this song I've heard. Okay, so it's going through some compression and there's reverb, the same 3.9 second hole that the guitar and the keyboards are going to. It's this Fairlight Orc 5. It's loaded into the EXS here. I just got a copy of it off the internet, dragged and dropped it. It's mapped across the entire key range of the sampler. Its original pitch, I think, is at C6 when you drag and drop it across an entire key range. But we're triggering it at D7. But if you play it its original pitch, there's a bit of brum leading into it. So what I did was, after dragging and dropping it to map it across all the keys, in the CXS, if you go to there's a sample on its single zone, drop that thing down there, open in sample editor, I dragged, see that? You can drag that front back to trim off some of the front because it's got more brum into it. So I want it to sound even more staccato. Because you're playing it up an octave, a little bit over an octave from its original pitch, it's going to play back faster anyway, but I still wanted it to be more staccato, so I trimmed the front off to make it even more staccato. There it is on D7. Bing, bang, bong. Right, that's that. Right, let's look at this snare now. This is the big thing for this song. This bucket-like, I call it a bucket snare. Right, let me take the headphones off of this. Okay, I did a lot of investigating about this. The general consensus of opinion, reading lots and lots and lots about it, is that it was a Lin side stick sample loaded into an Oberheim DX drum machine. Now, the early Oberheims, which Prince used actually, right? He used this same detuned rimshot thing in Dove's Cry, right? And he was a big user of the Oberheim DMX. I think was the second one. The DX was the first one. I think the second one was the DMX. I've used the DMX one. The thing about those two drum machines is you could get an EPROM blower and then you could blow your own sounds onto the chips. Okay, so Gussie Clarke is the producer of Rumours, and if you look at it, there's an interview with him you can find where he talks about who did the playing for the backing track, and he says that Clevie played the drums or played them into a drum machine. Clevie from Clevie and Steele, and you've got other interviews where Clevie and Steele are talking about their techniques in the studio, and they're specifically using the DX, and Clevie talks a lot about how you can get any sound onto the DX onto the chip. So therefore the whole thing comes about them using a Lindrum side stick that was blown onto the chip for the DX and then used detuned. So the general consensus of opinion, as I said, is that it's a Lindrum side stick detuned. Now, here's the thing. If we open up that, here's the track with the snare playing on it. Not you. There's reverb on here, but we'll come to that. Let me open the sampler. There's the sampler playing back just that snare sound. There's the EQ on it. I'm boosting the lower mids and giving it extra fizz at the top with a high shell. Open up the edit. There's the sample drag dropped, mapped across all the keys. Its original key is that we're hearing it at here detuned is C3. Play it up an octave. Hear that? It's a side stick, right? Well, the main body of it is a side stick because I've layered this sample, right? So people generally saying that, you know, because of this particular video interview that he did, it's a non-Oberheim sample loaded into the DX, and the general consensus of opinion is it is a Lin side stick detuned. So I searched around and found that sample. Here it is. This is the Lin side stick sample dragged onto a track. Right, there it is. It's already detuned, right? Now that's on its own, just the side stick detuned. It's got a little bit of crackle. That's pretty much exactly like the side stick Prince used in Dove's Cry, right? That's it. Raw. But if you listen to this Riddim, different versions of it, you can clearly hear that it isn't just a side stick sample. There's a detuned snare being layered with it because there's fizz and bucket snare sound underneath that side stick detune. So what I did was I got this is the detuned side stick on its own raw, and then I got a piece of the breakdown of the track, the Lady G version, and I chopped out one snare hit. Right? Now there is no snare hits anywhere where you don't have the bass note underneath it. This is the snare chopped out on its own from the track, and you can hear the bass note underneath it. And you hear all that. There's definitely a snare layered under that. A buckety snare tone with fizz, with snare wire fizz. And you can hear the boom boom of the bass under it. So what I did was I EQ'd it, and I used a low shelf to take out the bass note. Not entirely, but now can you really hear that fizz of the snare wire sound? There's definitely a detuned snare layered with that. So I took that, chopped out, and with the bass note EQ'd out, blended it with the original side stick. Oh, let's line them up. Blended it with the original side stick, and I balanced them and EQ'd them however I did it. Yeah, that's the side stick by itself. And blended with that, then we get that snare edge to it, which is what is in the song. So blended them together, EQ'd them however I did, and bounced them down to a new sample. There it is. That's the sample being used, right? There. Let's just mute these. There it is. That's my resulting sample. And There's the EQ for it. Take the shelf off. This is it raw with no EQ. What I'm doing is I'm giving it some bump down the bottom to emphasise that low mid body. Right. There. That's it. That sounds more like the one in the song now. Then that is loaded into the sampler. Just dropped in across all the keys, and it's not, when you do it that way with the excess, it's on C3. Now let's take the reverbs off, because there are two reverbs. It's just only going through the compressor, right? And let's take the EQ out as well. So this is it being triggered from that new sample I made from the two layers, being triggered from the XS, going just through the compressor. EQ is added there, fizzing up the top end with the high shelf, and a big boost at 200 Hz ish to really emphasize that bucket body. Then I listened to it a lot on different versions of the track, and it sounded to me like there was a gated reverb on. Gated reverb was fairly popular at that time. It was just coming in. And when you add gated reverb to a snare, it has an effect of giving it a lot more mid-body. Have a listen. This is the gate. It's then passing through a gated reverb inserted on the track. There's the gate. 1.1 gated chamber. Not too much wet. Don't want too much of it, but the dry up full because it's inserted. Right. Listen to it with and without the gated reverb. Just you. With the EQ, that is, but without the gated reverb. Gated reverb. Yeah, it gives it a lot more that midi tone, lower mid tone. And then it passes into a plate. That gives it the 1.3 second soft plate, but I've rolled back the decay to about 600 milliseconds. Not too wet, but don't want too much of that. And this is it with both reverbs. Either reverb can be the wet, because they're inserted, the wet can be adjusted to taste. So I could roll down the gate a bit. Yeah, you know what I mean? And you can adjust the plate to taste as well. Somewhere around there, right? Till it gets to the dub bits where it's you know, that's it. And the envelope wants to be set so that the sample can trigger all the way through when it's triggered. And there's the snare. Alrighty, that's it. Now, just a few extras to talk about. Oh, put bloody marker in. Right, a few extras to talk about. There's Phil. Look. If you listen to lots of versions of this track, and by versions I mean not just different versions with different singers on it, but version in reggae means not a dub, but it's an instrumental. There is tons of it. Clearly this was an original track with a lot more parts to it that was stripped back raw to create this Rumours Riddim that became famous through Gregory and then other artists. But if you listen to different versions, there's an alto sax playing some stuff. There's other synth work in it. There's lots of other things that you hear in different versions. For example, there's a ride. It wants to be quite bell-like, but not very realistic sounding, thin and fizzy, but with some bell tone. And someone has played over it the same as the hats. And you hear that played right across sections of the music in breakdowns. And that is on the ride is being used as a fill here. There are other fills that I haven't bothered putting in. There are some fills if you listen to different breakdowns and different releases of it, where there are very Lindrum sounding fills on snare and tom, but I haven't bothered putting those in. But here's a fill leading into this bit. Let's just hear that here, and it's got some of that ride and a double snare fill leading up, and that would be the drop. The music comes in on the next beat of the bar, the first beat of the next bar. So there's that ding ding. You can hear the tone of that ride. It's slightly artificial sounding, not too long, and it's got quite a bit of bell tone, and it's fairly high pitched, artificially sounding, right? So there is a little bit of that whole overall ride pattern that you can hear across whole sections of the breakdowns where someone's playing on the ride. But they've just isolated this couple of beats worth and added a fill after it. That just is a fill leading for this bit here, where it goes into the next bit of the music. Yeah, and then boom into it. And the intro to the Lady G track is that fill has been dragged to the front, right? It should be a 4-beat pattern, 1 bar, but it's been made 5 beats long, dragged out 1 extra beat in length, so it's now 5 beats long. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and then inside it, that fill has been dragged a 1/4 beat further forward and an extra snare hit put there. And so it's a 5-beat fill. So that little swing drops onto that, which is the first beat of 4 beats of fill. That's where the music comes in there, and then first beat of the next bar. So it's just been dragged out 1 extra beat, that swing note put in, dropping onto that first note. The whole fill from further up the track has been brought in, all of it dragged 1 1/4 beat back, and an extra snare note put in there. So, bam! Yeah, and in with the drop of the music. Yeah? Right? That's that. As I said, there are other fills on quite Lindrum sounding set of drum samples in other versions, breakdowns of this you can hear. You know, where it's it does sound quite Simmonsy, or some other type of electronic drum, synthy type thing. Quite 80s and flabby. There are fills you can hear in other different versions of this, which involve a snare and a tom. But I haven't bothered putting that in. I haven't bothered putting in the stabs on the orchestral stab, right? You know. But that's it, right? That's we've covered everything. It is a longer one, as I said, because there's quite a lot to look at here. Now, is there anything else? I've shown you the sounds I've used for the basic drums. We looked at that. We looked at the keys. We looked at the different bass lines. We looked at the bass line variation. Before I hit stop, I want to just think if I've covered everything. Yeah, that's it. Okay, so there's your tutorial. Now, I realise that some people following these tutorials are not using Logic. What I'm going to do is, there's a lot of audio in this project. Look, there's all the audio. There's loads of it. Where I imported different versions of the song, broke it down, analysed it, etc., etc. If I just zip this project up and upload it to our servers and make it available as a download, it'd be too big with all this audio. So what I've got to do is I've got to prepare a fresh version for download, because I'm going to give you this project. I'm going to strip all the audio out, save it, zip it up, but I will leave you the raw side stick and snare samples, and you'll also get them. You'll get that snare sample also loaded into the EXS. You'll get this whole mix as it is, right? And the Fairlight stab will be in the EXS on this track, right? So I'll upload that as a project anyone can load up and use. I'll also prepare a second download with just the orchestral hit and the snare sample in, which anyone can grab if they're using a different sequencer like Cubase or whatever, right? Alright, but look, guys, without boring you with my personal life, I've got some issues going on at the moment, which to do with where I work from, the premises. So I'm in the middle of some quite complicated stuff going on at the moment. Give me a few days on this, right? I'll finish this video, upload it, so you got the tutorial, and you're just going to have to come back and look at the description of this tutorial every day until you see the zip, you know, the links to the downloads, right? I'm sorry I can't do it any other way than that, but I'll try and get them up in the next few days after this video appears online, right? But I've got to create the thing, zip it, upload it to the server. Our server's moved, I've got to get things worked out about uploading it to the server again, and blah blah blah, right? Alright, so there you go, that's it, the Rumour Riddim. I love it, I love this tune. I love that, what I call like a transitional period where reggae was transitioning out of its more traditional roots at the end of the 80s into the early 90s, when it started to get more and more electronic modern edges to it. You know, you got Slang 10 came along, which changed everything. People started to mix differently. I can tell you, back in them times, before this, 2 years before this came out, you know, I was running a reggae studio and we were doing the most insane modern sounding electronic mixes, and the singers, the artists would listen and go, oh, no man, that's too extreme, oh it's too different, it's give me the more traditional one. All right, here's the other mix with the traditional big reverb and the echoes and all the rest of it, right? But we were mixing gated reverbs and quite electronic sounding stuff. There was a lot of experimentation going around that time, which eventually broke through. And you know, it was the beginning of that era where cheap MIDI equipment was becoming available. So people were using cheap MIDI sequencers. You know, the Yamaha QXs, QX7, QX21, Casio and Yamaha FM synths, and the phase distortion cheap Casio synths, the 101, the 4-operator Yamaha DXs. Or maybe if someone had the money, a full-blown 6-operator DX7, you know. But it was more usual to find the 4-op cheaper ones. You know, all that kind of thing. Early MIDI was starting to come in. You were still working with tape. You know, some people had gone a little bit extra and they worked out the whole thing of, you know, symptying the MIDI sequencer to tape, etc., or whatever, you know. Or other people would just bounce down the created MIDI backing, running off the sequencer to tape, and then run the tape and overdub vocals and things, however you did it. But it was that transitional period that this rhythm came out in, and I just love that. And it went forward into the all, you know, I suppose you could say it kind of started, didn't it, with Herbman Hustling. That was so different, that track. It really was. With that syndrome. A very, very different feel, that. Yeah. All that kind of thing. I just love that transitional period, as I like to call it anyway. So, there you go. The Rumours Riddim. I hope you enjoyed it. I hope it was useful. I'll see you for the next one.